I teach at SAO High School, and I also work at Yeshivat Maharat in Riverdale, and I'm going to be moderating this wonderful session. And I'm being very online and not paper destroying, earth destroying. So I just wanted to say who our presenters are. But you're presenting, right? Okay, so I'm just going to say a second of who you are. Okay. So Aryeh Laufer is going to be presenting today, and he's the head of engineering and inquiry Beit Midrash. And I just think that his title alone is like automatically we're like, oh, I want to hear what this person has to say. At the Idea School, which is in Bergen County in New Jersey. And the Idea School is a project-based learning school that is new and was founded by Tikvah Wiener. And I think you've been on staff since the beginning, right? It's in its second year now or first year?
It's in its first year.
First year.
I've been on the staff since Tikvah's living room in August of 2017.
So what we're going to be doing today is actually very cool. We're going to be analyzing a project-based learning initiative called the Inquiry Beit Midrash, but we're going to be analyzing it through a very particular protocol, which is kind of like a project-based analysis. It's like we are engaging in project-based learning because we're going to be learning about this program by sort of engaging in analysis ourselves and engaging in, instead of hearing a frontal presentation about it, actually engaging and working with the moving parts. So when I was meeting with Tikvah and Aryeh on the phone about it, I said, this is very meta, because we're doing a project-based learning activity about project-based learning. And they were like, yes, that's exactly what we're doing. What we're going to be doing is using something called the tuning protocol, which is in the app. You can find it however you found that other document when we did in the first session. That's the same thing. I don't remember all the things you have to click, but
you have to click Educational Innovation,
yeah,
and then Inquiry Beit Midrash, and there will be documents in there.
Right, okay. So what you want to look at now is the tuning protocol. And you'll see that this is a means of fine-tuning and analyzing project-based learning initiatives. So you'll see that we have a very precise protocol that we're going to follow, including me being done with my introduction in about 15 seconds. And then we're going to have Aryeh present for 10 minutes. And then we're going to spend a few minutes asking clarifying questions. And at the beginning of the clarifying questions, I'm going to just review with you about what exactly that means, what it was a clarifying question versus a more critical question. Then we're going to examine student work, and that's also in your app. We're going to actually do that for less than 10 to 15 minutes because there's not a lot of student work to look at, actually. We're going to pause. And then we're going to give warm and cool feedback. And again, I'm going to talk to you about what warm and cool feedback actually means when we get to that. Reflect and debrief. Okay, so I'm leaving that outline here for now. And then at the end, we can reflect on the procedure that we use to analyze the program and talk about what that kind of means for project-based learning. Okay.
Great. So if you guys are not lost yet, get ready to be a little more lost into the project-based learning protocol and crazy. Before I start, I'd just like to thank the Mayberg Foundation and the JEIC, and I think the program that this was made from through Tikvah and her partners through HaKaveret, which has allowed us to do this holy work. So I'm very grateful for it, and it's been amazing teaching this year. So let's jump right into it, because I think I only have 8 minutes, and we're being very particular with this protocol. So the Inquiry Beit Midrash. Inquiry Beit Midrash is made up of 3 parts. We have the inquiry, the Beit Midrash, and at the end, students engage in creating a deliverable or product that they bring into the real world. I'm going to discuss each of them in turn, and then we'll kind of sum up at the end. And then I'm going to give you the challenge, which is going to be what you're going to discuss and deliberate and kind of help us figure out what we can do for this project tuning protocol, which is what we're doing today. Okay? So, inquiry. What is inquiry? So inquiry-based learning is a type of learning which essentially tries to put students and their passions and their questions at the forefront right at the beginning of the learning. The reason why we do this right at the beginning is because that totally changes and transforms the rest of the learning, as I'm going to explain further very soon. But what that looks like in the Idea School, in the Inquiry Beit Midrash, and specifically what we've done over the last year in the Inquiry Beit Midrash, is that we started off with students being able to take an area of inquiry, anything they're interested in, whether Jewish or not, and create a mind map out of it. We're going to pass that around soon, later on in the protocol, but some of the work is already on the table, where they ask a question and they kind of spread it out and ask more questions on it and see where can this line of inquiry go? Where does it lead into smaller lines of inquiry and other things like that? So we've done that to kind of spark the students' inquiry and allow them to really explore that. Another thing we've done throughout the year, sporadically, is we've led Socratic seminars and different discussions in Judaism on different bigger topics in Judaism. So God Talks is the name of one that we led, kind of just put students in a room, just like you're kind of arranged now, exactly like this actually, and discuss what are our feelings towards God. Who is God? What is God? A lot of students, belief, not belief, like what are they feeling towards, where are they in 9th grade, coming into a Jewish high school? What are the principles of Jewish faith? Are there any? What do the texts or the sources say about that, right? And just a lot of creating safe spaces for students to feel like I can ask my questions, my issues with Judaism, my loves of Judaism, maybe my hates of Judaism, different things that they're trying to explore within their personal meaning towards Judaism. And that's mainly what we've done for the inquiry part. And that kind of leads into the Beit Midrash part. One of the faculty put it a very beautiful way. He said, what's bothering Rashi? That's always a question we hear when we're learning Tanakh, right? What's bothering Rashi? What's really bothering Rashi? But as educators, we want to ask what's bothering Rashi, but also what's bothering our students, right? What's bothering them? What's bringing them to the table to even start learning Rashi? So in the Beit Midrash part of Inquiry Beit Midrash, now we're able to do that. They are going to, the whole Jewish text that they're going to be interacting with is going to be driven by what they care about and by what they're passionate about. And in our Beit Midrash model, there's actually, it's more of an open model. So we don't just only use Jewish texts. We will, because it's about the student's inquiry, we'll use Jewish texts along with other multimedia, so movies, arts, poetry, whatever it is. One example, students are exploring wonder and nature and God and how you kind of find God in nature. So they're learning Rambam's Yesodei HaTorah, and they're also studying Netflix's Planet Nature in school, which with Rabbi Tavi Kaza, which is so fascinating to see working together in the Beit Midrash. And the other really interesting thing about Beit Midrash that I'd like to call your attention to and focus on, especially in the Inquiry Beit Midrash model, is that oftentimes we're over-focusing on how are we going to get our kids to be able to read Jewish text in these Jewish schools, and it is a big issue because it takes a lot of time to be able to become Jewish literate in Jewish text and advance their skills. But so often, once they're already oriented, while the students are already oriented towards, already interested in their topics, then they're much more able, or wanting, I should say, to advance their skills and study more deeply into the text they're already doing. One student who had no Hebrew skills, couldn't even read, is now I want to be able to read this text more so I can explore natural morality through Tanakh in a much more deep and literal way. Everything is driven by their own passion, which is an incredible thing to see. And that's the inquiry and the Beit Midrash. And the last part is the real-world project or deliverable that comes at the end, which basically it takes the whole culmination of the process they did and they make some sort of project that interacts with the real world in some way. That's a manifestation of their learning. If it sounds vague, it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be very open-ended for each student to be able to create whatever they want. A lot of students created artworks, which are going to be passed around at some point. One student created a one-pager. One student created a book which is a artistic rendering of the book of Megillah Ruth and her exploration through it with an artist statement. And there'll be more work passed around in the next part of the protocol. But overall, a lot of students have done that. Some students have done digital paintings using Gemarot and taking images from the Gemara and creating paintings out of that. And these are presented at the Idea School exhibition, which kind of brings it into the real world. But it doesn't have to be that. It could also be a Tikkun Olam or a social enterprise. One of the things I'm doing with some students right now, actually, is exploring tefillah. Different sources in tefillah, different approaches to tefillah, because they were very interested in these questions. And one of the things they were doing, and one of the things we decided to look at instead of creating an art project, which we did last semester, was create a new tefillah experience for our school. So they're going to be leading tefillah in a couple weeks with a new experience that they've created from our learning, right? It's not necessarily a product, but it engages with the community in a real way, and it creates a real connection towards what we learned throughout the semester. And to sum it all up, kind of, and the theme of this conference is also values and putting that into action. I think one of the main things that we're trying to get at is the value of meaning making. we're often, and in a very personal way, we all are trying to create meaning out of our lives. We're trying to make things meaningful, to learn and connect things to our Judaism and our Jewish heritage through the lens of us creating meaning. And students are, especially in 9th grade, are struggling through the same thing. And ultimately, that's what Inquiry Beit Midrash is trying to get at and foster. So our challenge for today is, and this is on a much more practical scale, but kind of taking everything I've just said. We have 13 students in our school. I, Aryeh Laufer, Tikvah Wiener, and Rabbi Tavi Kozlo work with the students twice a week for an hour apiece, so 2 hours a week, in groups of 2 or 3 for the Inquiry Beit Midrash. So our challenge to you is how are we going to basically scale? Because we have a lot more students coming in, and this is a bigger question in general to think about in terms of Inquiry Beit Midrash for the world, but how are we going to scale for this school? What does it look like to take this sort of program and make it bigger?
We're now going to take a few minutes to have you ask clarifying questions to Aryeh. So just to clarify what a clarifying question is. A clarifying question is not a question that gives feedback about whether it's a good program or a bad program. A clarifying question is asking for facts. How do you grade this work? How many teachers are in the room? I need to answer that question. Those kinds of questions, fact-based questions. Okay, so we're going to go now to 3 minutes of clarifying questions.
We're going to do 5, actually.
Oh, 5, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, it's okay.
Yeah.
We have a little extra time.
That's right, I forgot. 5 minutes. Yeah.
I'd like to know a little bit more about the teacher's work with the students. Like, what is the teacher doing? What are the students doing? Is the teacher with them the whole time? Like, a little bit more information about that.
Yeah, answer.
We're following the rules very carefully.
Right.
Meaning what the learning process looks like, or the creation of the product in the Beit Midrash, or
I want to know what you're doing. Like, you're asking about scaling, so I need to know what is the interacting. Are you facilitating? Are you teaching the whole hour that you're with them? Like, what is happening during that hour when a grown-up is with 2 students?
all of the above. Facilitate, first of all, bringing outside knowledge and text, eliciting questions, back and forth of the just literal learning of the text or the interpretation of the Netflix, right, whatever it is. And then ultimately, usually working with the students to make sure there's like a high quality of work going on, and maybe, always asking questions to kind of bring the students, like, is this what we want our deliverable to be? Do we feel like this will be impactful? Is this meaningful to us? But like a constant kind of give and take, I would say.
So I wanted to better understand, currently you have 13 students, what scaling means in terms of numbers, I guess for next year, second, in terms of how we're helping you, and like what are, looking at this as a challenge in terms of what you're hoping we will, are we supposed to unpack how to provide this inquiry-based, help you think about how to provide this inquiry-based model to 2 hours a week or 3 hours a week to what number of students, like, what better understand the scale and the question.
So I think we're projecting about 40 to 45 students total, and including the 9th and 10th grade, to make it a multi-age classroom. But feel free to, be a little creative if you're feeling that way. Yeah.
What sort of scaffolding do you provide for students to develop their questions about God and about other things that they're wondering about?
Great question. So there's the mind maps that I talked about, and there's also the seminars that existed. But that actually has been one of the more interesting challenges, especially a lot of students who have come from free or open environment schools where they're constantly following different lines of inquiry fall into that much more naturally. But a lot of students coming in from more traditional schools where they've been basically, just taking tests or listening frontally to education, are not so used to just like popcorning with a bunch of different questions, and that's been a much slower process. But a lot of times they're doing that with their individual groups.
We also use just different questioning techniques with them as well
Yeah.
in the beginning. So we got them like loosened up in terms of like doing things from like the Right Question Institute or other sort of question formulation techniques, that we found.
Right. There was like a whole curriculum there, but yeah.
I may have missed this, but is this the structure for all of the Jewish text learning for every subject, or is this specific to the inquiry Beit Midrash?
Meaning the
Is
other
there
Beit
other
Midrash
Jewish
classes?
studies learning that's going on that does not follow this format?
Yes, there is. There is a morning Beit Midrash, which is also happens to be somewhat similar because we're kind of an inquiry-based, project-based learning school.
Right.
But there are different Jewish spaces that could, if we decided to focus the inquiry Beit Midrash one way, could still use other times. Let's say, for example, more explicit or traditional modes of Jewish education or textual education.
Do students have time within the structure of the week? You said that you're working with them 1 to 2 hours a week. Do they have time to pursue that on their own or in groups, the work within the school day, or are they? Is their project limited to the 1 to 2 hours?
Great question. That's usually, I would say that we do have something called project time throughout our school day, which they can work on various projects that they're working on throughout the school. They can also work it in their personal time if they're really interested. But a lot of times they do use the inquiry Beit Midrash time when we get up to the creation of their real world project or deliverable. It's just like roll into class, and it's not class, it's just working on their project. Does that make sense?
4 more seconds. Want to do one more question?
One more question.
Could you describe the timeline of from their passion to the mind map to the production?
Yeah, so to be frankly honest with you, it's been very interesting because each one of our semesters, the timeline's been very different. I would say the first semester we invested heavily on the inquiry part because a lot of the students were struggling initially. Most of them were coming from traditional school environments, from just like their like passions, like what are you even talking about? Now they had them, and after a month of questioning, they're like starting to get it much more, and like at this point of the year they're totally involved in it. But in that first semester, a lot more time had to be dedicated towards the inquiry, and then less time could be dedicated towards the Beit Midrash part and the deliverable part. But at this point in the year, it's kind of like the inquiry part it infuses the whole model, but it's not any time at all. If that sounds a little vague, I can give more specifics, but it's very much a model in flux. This is a program that it's in its first year, it's in its infancy, and so we've been playing around with different groups and different timelines because we're trying to kind of experiment and see. If that makes sense.
Okay, so in the interest of sticking carefully to our rubric here, we're going to now embark on examining the work. So 2 of the documents are in the app. So if you go back, and then you'll see the 2 documents are below the initial tuning protocol. And there are also, I think, some of the student work is out here on the table. So what you're going to do now is look closely at the work, making notes, either written notes or in your head, about where the work seems in tune or aligned with the stated goals, and guided by the presenter's focus, questioning, and goals, where there might be a disconnect between what you're seeing in the work and the goals of the inquiry Beit Midrash. It's possible you might have some clarifying questions at this point, but take a look at the work. And if you have a clarifying question, we could address that. So we're going to do that for about 8 minutes. Is that what you said?
Yeah, like we'll take about 5 to 7 minutes.
5 to 7 minutes.
on work.
Okay.
And also, I just want to say that the artwork, the work is connected. So the artwork, that says Ruth IBM project, is the one pager. It's like a visual representation of Ruth. And then the artist statement was the student's explanation of that artwork. So the work is connected. The actual work is here with some hard copies, as well as the student's original mind map, which was all about questions about conversion and who is a Jew. And then there's another student artwork that was from another group. That was the question there was, does the Torah believe in natural morality? So this is one student's process. And then there's just a book of basically of our unit from our second trimester, which was all about justice and ethics, and that's just what was going on in the rest of the school. So you could also see some of the work in context.
Okay. At this point, everyone is going to pause. Everyone's being kind of silent anyway, but we're going to silently reflect on warm and cool feedback that we want to give about the project. So I'm just going to say something quick about what warm and cool feedback is, and you can see this is on your sheet as well. So warm feedback is comments about how the work presented seems to align with the desired goals, and cool feedback would point out what you think might include some disconnects, some gaps, or some problems with the project and whether it's achieving its intended goals. So we're going to take a couple of minutes to think about what kind of warm or cool feedback you would like to give.
I just want to restate the challenge, which was to help us scale. So also in thinking about maybe the things that align with our desire to scale and the things that we might want to think about, rethink, change, modify, etc. So, because the protocol is for something specific about assessment, so we're kind of like changing the challenge a little. So I want to kind of orient us towards that. This is like a 3 minutes.
Wait, may I ask a clarifying
Yeah.
question?
Yeah.
So in our warm and cool feedback, you want something applied to scale or to this project?
Well, so our particular challenge that we're asking you to kind of give feedback on is, like what is work, like how are we to scale this, right? So the feedback should be directed towards that as well.
Okay. We are now going to begin giving warm and cool feedback, and we're going to start with warm feedback, and we're going to understand that one of the goals of education is to be productive and constructive. So we're going to start with that warm feedback because it's positive. Also understanding, as we all know as educators, that warm feedback is something that establishes trust, and it means that a person is not coming at you from a place of judgment, but rather as a place of helping. So we're going to start with warm feedback and then
Just
move to
process
cool.
question?
Yeah.
So you have the warm feedback and the cold feedback on also input on the question. So can you just explain process-wise whether the input on the question is part of the warm, part of the cold, part of both of them?
I think it would be part of both of them. Yeah. Okay, warm feedback. Go ahead.
The Miglat Ruth artist statement was just very heartwarming, beautifully done, and things stay very true to the whole process. My question would be, with scale, this is a very personal journey here. And even in a class of 2, what was the other student doing when there was a deep dive into this topic? And in a classroom, what if the other students didn't find this to be the direction that they wanted to take, even the same topic, but go in a different direction, and how that would work out for staff in terms of deciding what to really deep dive into, and also in terms of what the final project would look like.
So that was kind of actually a combination. I'm just going to point out that's a combination of warm and cool feedback, right? There's warm feedback about the project, and some concern about how it would be scaled. So warm feedback, yeah.
My warm feedback is about the mind map and the series of questions that evolved that I think was miraculous and really beautiful inquiry process. And it's very, I think it's a rubric or a procedure that once taught is easy for students to apply to many others, and might even be easy for students in Chavruta to do without needing an instructor to do it. Asking questions is easier for students than writing answers sometimes if we teach them how to do that. So I think it's a beautiful, very scalable piece.
Yeah.
Just building on the previous comment, I think it's brilliant, and I also think there's nothing wrong with everyone sharing their passion, sharing what they believe, and working together with others who might have other passions and other interests, and not necessarily having to work together in that. They're collaborators. That's what happens all the time. We're all in this room right now, taking away different learning. So I don't know why that is a problem with scale. The scale is that everyone you're living life in a real way, and this is just how it really goes down. Because at some point in life, you'll be in places where you have certain interests, and there's people in that room that don't share that. You still have to cooperate.
So, what I'm struck with is the culture that got created in the group. There was something that I read about a girl being able to share that she was adopted and feel really kind of warmly accepted. And I'm wondering about the culture being a space where there's a conversation about scale. Because scale is a Jewish issue, right? If you think about Eretz Israel, right, and how it unfolded, we've had a lot of mass, large groups coming in. I can imagine whether that question or other questions, choosing a process of them first observing in the culture the process that they have gone through, and how initially asking these questions and thinking about their own passions was different than how it is now, and what that might look like when they're newcomers, and having that be a conversation that then they become part of the scaling team, that somehow there are 3 of you as educators, and there might be new educators, but you have the 13 students that could be part of the team that helps hold the culture as you move on.
Yeah, I just want to agree with that, and my warm 100%, and my warm feedback is that I love what you said about how it took many of your students a month to figure out the inquiry phase of this, and how that means that the culture that you're building doesn't require a certain kind of person, but requires a certain kind of thinking and a skill that they can learn, and as you said, pass on to others as you scale.
So my warm feedback is that it seems like it achieves more than it set out to do, in the sense that it's not just an inquiry-based Beit Midrash, but the fact that you're enabling and the students to bring in other aspects of their life and passions creates a more holistic perspective. Just in the way you described the combination of Rambam Sisori Torah with the Netflix, whatever, nature thing. So I think what you're able to achieve is that much greater. And I wanted to, I guess, build on what you said about fostering that culture of trust. Like, it seems you've also built a community that celebrates differences and accepts diversity, and that's incredible.
Okay, you can also feel free to start with something warm, and if you have cool feedback to say that as well. Yeah.
One of the things I was particularly, I think, is a gift is the time that a student has to dive deep. And I think it's actually a rare occurrence in schools now, because you have to cover so many things, you have to do so many things, even in a project-based model where like you're working towards something. But it seems from this work that there was time to go deep with the learning, the personal relationship, the connection, and to come out with something that I imagine they were very proud of, right? And to have had the real time for that. And so the wondering that I am thinking about in terms of the scale is, how do we still honor that time? And I imagine that what it will have to look like is a little bit more independent time. And so what are the systems and structures that you can build and put in place to continue to allow for that depth, while pulling away the teacher's time.
Okay, cool feedback. Continue. Yeah.
I'm going to give some warm feedback that leads into some cool feedback, sort of interrelated.
Yeah.
So I really like the idea of passion-driven inquiry into Torah learning, right? Because it's sort of the difference. Yeah, I'm sorry. I think like it's sort of the difference between Limudei Chodesh and Limudei Chol subjects is that there's an implicit understanding that this is supposed to be close to your heart, right? What you're doing, it's not just necessarily a skill set you're building so you can do something really cool with it. It's supposed to sort of change the way that you are, which I think is sort of the PBL idea in general, but when it comes to Torah learning, it's supposed to be that. So I really love the idea of what you're doing is that you get to sort of go down lines of inquiry and try and go dive deep into those thought processes. Piece of cool feedback perhaps, and I didn't really get to ask you a clarifying question about it, but maybe giving more of a, I don't want to say a firm framework of how to go deep into a subject, but that's sort of a level of ownership of Torah text. When I spend a lot of time looking at Torah text, so maybe when we talk about the people who we think of as great learners who really can sort of tie pieces of Torah together, they have a good breadth of knowledge, and they understand how the Torah inquiry process works from the Masorah, right? No matter who you're talking about, where they fall in the spectrum of Judaism, they sort of understand how to get there. So I don't know, and as a point of clarification, I don't know if you give them those steps to go very deep, or it's just something that happens as they get more curious, you lead them to it. But maybe as a way to scale, if they knew that I know if I want to dive into Gemara, I can look at this process, and this is how I can go deep and explore Rishonim as well as the face value text, right? If I want to go and explore philosophic ideas just throughout Tanakh, if they knew that there was a place that they could clearly do that wasn't totally reliant on the 3 people in the school that were like the facilitators to that process. That's an idea.
Okay. At this point, we're going to engage in reflection, where Aryeh is going to reflect. He's going to talk to you about how your comments impacted his thinking and what he learned from your feedback. So this is a time he's not going to defend himself, he's just going to reflect back. And this is not a time for you to give more feedback, but just a time for him to reflect back to you. I'm going to get out of the way.
Okay. That was all really, really fascinating feedback. I'm really happy we have all this in video so I can remember it. So I'm going to take notes right now. Yeah, I'll just say some broader reflections, some of the points. First of all, I think a lot of you were noting some of the amazing, transformative, emotional, cultural things that happen through the inquiry Beit Midrash, which on the one hand is surprising, and on the other hand is totally part of this model in our school. And sometimes that needs to be addressed explicitly in the school, like this student, when the student did want to share that personal fact about herself, there did need to be some assurances and work with students to make sure we were all in the same social emotional understanding space. But a lot of it did happen naturally, because a lot of times when the students, especially during Socratic seminars about God and different students discussing their different and a lot of times not PC for the adults in the room to hear, it did engender a space where they all feel like, oh, we can share these things with each other. And so overall, and throughout the day, especially in our school, this is always being created. So that was very, that was something beautiful to hear, but I think that you guys all naturally saw, which is really cool. The idea to bring the students in a meta way into it, realize that they're part of this scaling process. We all have to be part of the process. It's a really interesting idea. It's kind of like what we're doing with you guys. You now are part of the PBL process. Congratulations, a lot of fun. But yeah, that's really, really interesting. It's also, it reminds me of kind of more of a democratic school model where students are like, yeah, why don't we think about the norms and creating our own norms and culture and how that develops intentionally to keep what we've done throughout the year and not. So that's really, really interesting. I hope I'm not going to miss anyone's specific feedback. To kind of answer your clarifying question / cool criticism, it's a really, really great point. The inquiry Beit Midrash model also allows for a student who wants to just I really want to deeply dive into Masachet Megillah maybe with Farshim. Yeah, absolutely. We want that, and that becomes there. And in reality, right, that easily fits into this type of model. Inquiry, right, deep dive in the Beit Midrash, and then creating something out of that. Maybe that deliverable is just a Dvar Torah or some presentation out of their deep traditional learning. And that could also happen within each project. But even if the students wanted to do that, a traditional learning, it almost fits beautifully into this model in a way, and with still emphasizing inquiry and the deliverable in a way that I think a regular learning model would.
So we're going to debrief now and talk a little bit about how this tuning protocol, I was going to say mechanism, how this tuning protocol worked as a method of analyzing a project-based learning project. And again, I want to acknowledge this kind of meta thing that we're doing here, using project-based analysis to analyze a project-based learning project, which is very hands-on and very active. And I also want to acknowledge, well, okay, I'm not going to acknowledge that yet. So how did it work? What do you think? Yeah.
I think it's incredible. I think that it gives us whole experience doing it. It gives us experience seeing what the students are going to go through. And I know I'm taking back a number of ideas for implementation in the program, much of which is extremely timely. So thank you.
Yeah.
I think using this protocol allowed us to kind of gain a common foundational understanding of what you're doing, and I think it also allowed the person doing the presentation to get feedback that would be very, very useful, and to be able to actually, in the moment, take time to start reflecting on it, which I think are tremendously powerful tools.
I want to say that what you're saying actually is something that we spoke about a bit when we were preparing for the session, which is that, sometimes people think that project-based learning is just loosey-goosey, kumbaya, we're not really, no rules. And you saw that we actually were very, very methodical about following this protocol. And in fact, project-based learning also has protocols and ways of assessing things that actually result in incredibly productive learning going on. Yeah?
Thinking in this for a moment, right, you were the student, this was your project that you're bringing to us. What a valuable moment it was when you heard us say, you had these values that you wanted to bring out, the safety, the personal meaning. And I guess it's from looking at the product you saw it, but how powerful it was to have other people see it also and validate it.
Anyone else? Yeah.
I think the alignment and the methodology and the content was really helpful and beautiful, and actually a wonderful reflection of what Todd was talking about earlier in terms of the cloth, the importance of the cloth, the delivery.
Great. Okay. Thank you so much.